So now I'm going to go over the techniques for spiritual awakening and timing in this spiritual astrology course. And so there will be charts, and also we'll have these rules for when karmas ripen. And then we have case studies to look at as well. So let's just get into it. So we're looking at this document, Techniques for Spiritual Awakening and Timing. And this is just in general for the ripening of karmas. These are rules straight from Brihad Parashara Horasastra, which talks about when things happen. And also, we're going to talk about these karmas down here and yogas down here. And then also what makes things happen in their planetary cycles. So we'll just look at it. In dasha cycles, karmas are produced based on the planet as a karaka, which means a natural house ruler. Karaka as a natural ruler, which means what the planet is, like Jupiter is teachers, inspiration, Saturn is facing difficulty, persevering through difficulty, Sun is our individual power. That's the planet as a karaka, as a natural ruler, natural indicator. And then secondarily as a house ruler, which means, like, for instance, in this case we have a Pisces rising sign. So Mars rules the 9th house and the 2nd house, because Mars rules Aries and Scorpio, like we said in the last class. Planets rule houses. So in the dasha cycles, which are these planetary cycles, just to start from the very beginning, the ripening of karmas happen based on the planets as a karaka, as a house ruler, as the ruler of a planet in its sign. Dispositor means ruler, like for instance the moon would be produced by Mars dasha, because Mars rules the moon. The moon is in Aries. Mars rules Scorpio, so Mars dasha would also produce Rahu and Saturn. And a dispositor of a planet in its nakshatra, which means Mars dasha would also produce any planets in Chitra nakshatra, in Mrigashira nakshatra, or in Dhanishta nakshatra, because Mars rules those nakshatras in the Vimshotri dasha scheme. So this just shows what gets produced in dasha cycles. So when the dasha cycle of Jupiter runs, first thing it's going to do is wake up Jupiter energy, like, here it is, where's the hope? What gives me hope? What inspires me? Because that's Jupiter as a karaka. That's going to first wake up. Then for Pisces person, Jupiter rules the 1st and 10th house. So it says, who am I? 1st house, what's my true identity? 10th house, what am I doing? What's my career? What's my impact in life? Which we usually experience through our career. That's the impact. So then it rules that 1st and 10th house, like we say, when Jupiter dasha would awaken, because Jupiter rules Pisces, Jupiter rules Sagittarius, and that falls in the 1st and 10th house in this chart. And then dispositor of planet in its Rashi, Jupiter dasha also activates Mars, which is Mars energy as courage, also Mars as a house ruler, 2nd and 9th house ruler. It also activates Venus, Mercury, and the Sun. So you see in this case, Jupiter actually rules a lot. I'm just using this as an example. Jupiter rules Venus, which is the karaka of romance, and also the 3rd and 8th house ruler. And it also rules Mercury, the 4th and 7th house ruler, and the indicator of flexibility, change in direction. It also rules the Sun, the 6th house ruler, which has to do with effort, hard work, and also purification, because that's the nature of the Sun. So Jupiter rules a lot here. And then if there's any planet in Jupiter nakshatras, which would be nakshatras of Punarvasu, Vishaka, and Purvabhadra, which there are not, Jupiter would also activate that. So this is what these rules mean. So it just means it activates it. It produces it. Okay? This is important, because one of the biggest mistakes people make, and right away, people will say, oh, Jupiter dasha, Jupiter's in the 7th house, relationships. Now, it goes to the 7th house, which means all of these things are going to be influenced and changed by partners, and there's a big influence on relationships, and you're going to see a lot of these things work out through the area of relationships. And of course, where the planet goes is going to be important. It's going to show, like, the sort of dynamic behind all of these things that get activated. But you make a big mistake by saying, oh, Jupiter goes to the 7th house, relationships are going to be influenced. Of course, because again, the planet is there, but that's not what gets produced. The motivation is going to be based on the planet as a house ruler and as a karaka. The first thing is it wakes up, like I said, what's my purpose, what's my meaning, and literally for this person especially, what's my purpose because it rules the 1st house. And what's my impact? Am I showing the kind of impact in my life that I want because Jupiter also rules the 10th house? If not, so what that means is then the relationship is going to get changed or worked on based on those principles. If the relationship isn't supporting the identity, if the relationship is not supporting the career or impact, it's going to get changed, for example. But these are the motivations, okay? And it's also saying, how much courage do I have? How much connection do I have? And in this case, Jupiter also rules the 7th house ruler, which means Jupiter rules Mercury, which rules the 7th. So Jupiter Dasha activates Mercury. The biggest reason Jupiter has such an impact on relationships for this person is because it rules the 7th house ruler, and it rules the karaka of relationships, which is Venus. So Jupiter actually rules both. And it's in the 7th house, yes, but those are the things. Jupiter rules the 7th house lord, and it rules Venus. These are the two indicators of relationships. And Jupiter rules the Sun, which is the 6th house, which shows the willingness to work hard to make those things happen, or to let go of them, or to purify, because that's also the nature of the Sun. So these are just general overviews, so I'm going to get more into the specifics as we go through. And it says there's no hierarchy in the above list. You need to look for confluence of factors to see what the most prevalent issues will be. No hierarchy means it's no less important that Jupiter is the dispositor of a planet in its nakshatra than it is Jupiter as a karaka. They're all different things, and they equally produce things. There's nothing like, oh, well, that's just the nakshatra ruler. It's not like it's the karaka. Again, people always want to start quantifying things. Well, which is more important? Which overrides the other one? Which cancels out the other one? None of that happens, so don't think like that. Nothing ever cancels anything out. What you want to do is start to do this. You need to look for a confluence of factors to see what the most important prevalent issues will be, like we just did here. Look at all these influences on relationships. A confluence of factors means more than one indicator, like we just did with relationships. Forget for a second that Jupiter's in the 7th house. Even if Jupiter was up here, Jupiter's going to have a huge impact on relationships because Jupiter rules Venus, which is the karaka of relationships, and Jupiter rules Mercury, which is the 7th house ruler. So Jupiter Dasha automatically wakes up the relationships because of what it rules. And you look for a confluence of factors. It rules both. So Jupiter Dasha would have certainly shown a change in this person's approach to relationships because it rules both of them. Before she was in Rahu, this is a woman, she was in Rahu, which is, again, very different. This Jupiter Dasha would have set a whole lot of things changing, so we'll look at the thing specifically when we get to it. But that's what I mean by confluence. And it's in the 7th house. Ta-da! So, I mean, you got 3 big things here. It rules both karakas, and it's in the house. So her relationship to people in general are going to change. Be a big transformation around that. Pay close attention to when the Dasha Bhukti cycle line up with the Bhukti planet ruled by the Mahadasha planet. What that means is, pay close attention to, like, for instance, in this case, Jupiter, Mars Dasha, Jupiter, Venus, Jupiter, Mercury, Jupiter, Sun, because Jupiter rules the Sun, Jupiter rules Mercury, Jupiter rules Venus, Jupiter rules Mars. So when you see the Mahadasha planet ruling the secondary Dasha planet, pay close attention to what that means. Big changes come then, based on whatever it indicates. For example, Jupiter, I give an example that just illustrates this. So yogas now explore the deeper connections between the planets and how they interact with each other. The word yoga means to join. When planets interact, they join forces with each other and also join us to their forces in interesting and subtle ways. Yogas are an important part of understanding the variations of color and nuance that planets bring astrologically. So now I'm going to show this from the chapter in Brihat Parashara Horasastra that talks about yogas. So it says, lordship of Kendras and Konas. If there be an exchange between a lord of a Kendra and lord of a Kona, or if a lord of a Kendra is yuti with the lord of a Kona in a Kendra or in a Kona, or if a lord of a Kona is in a Kendra or vice versa, or if there happens to be a full drishti between a lord of a Kendra and lord of a Kona, they cause a yoga. One born with such yoga will become a king and famous. So all that means is, as I've broken it down, when an angle ruler and a trinal house ruler join or exchange with each other in an angle or trinal house, powerful Raja Yoga is formed. If an angle and trinal house ruler aspect each other, Raja Yoga will be formed. Or if the lord of an angle is in a trinal house or vice versa, a yoga is formed. Also if they exchange, which if there be an exchange, also I forgot to put that one there. Exchange means like Jupiter and Mercury are exchanging with each other. Jupiter rules a trine, Mercury rules an angle. So that's also a Raja Yoga. And they're in angles and trines as well. So even if they just exchange with each other, even if they weren't in the trinal houses, like in those houses specifically, there would be a Raja Yoga. In this case, they would have to be because they only rule angles for these dual signs. I don't want to get too sidetracked. If that was confusing, just forget it. But anytime an angle and a trine lord exchange, it's going to form a Raja Yoga. If it happens in angles, or one of them is in an angle, one is in a trine, or whatever, it makes it just that much more impactful based on whatever is being shown. So all of these things are possible, and they're not all equal. Again, if you get them aspecting in houses that aren't necessarily as good, because all they have to do is aspect each other and they form what he's calling a Raja Yoga. But if you're getting them aspecting, like let's say in difficult houses, then the yoga is not going to necessarily push the person up in life because they're in places that aren't necessarily supporting that. If you get these associations, especially in trinal and angular houses, like aspects especially, because the aspect is really the weakest one. The strongest is when you get them, I should say it's the weakest one because there's a potential that they're not going to be in powerful houses. If you get aspects through powerful houses, that's going to be powerful. Powerful houses means angles and trines. So the rule is actually as simple as when you get an angular house ruler, angular houses are houses 1, 4, 7, and 10, interacting with trinal house rulers, which are houses 1, 5, and 9, like we said in the video on houses. When you get those planetary rulers interacting with each other, a powerful yoga is formed, especially if they're in those houses specifically. And this just says, if one and the same graha gets lordship of a Kona as well as a Kendra, or if a graha is in a Kendra or in a Kona, it will prove to be a yoga karaka. The planet that owns both an angle and a trinal house itself creates a Raja Yoga. When this occurs, the planet becomes in some ways more important than the Lagna Lord. Lagna, if you don't know, means the ruler of the rising sign. So Mars for Cancer and Leo is a Yoga Karaka, because for Cancer and Leo, Mars rules an angle and a trine house by himself. Saturn for Libra and Taurus, also Saturn for Libra and Taurus rules an angle and a trinal house by himself. Venus for Aquarius and Capricorn, same thing. So for those ascendants, which is half the chart, you need to know this. Cancer and Leo, you need to look and see where Mars is. If for a Cancer or Leo, Mars is in any angle or house, angle or trinal house, it forms that Raja Yoga by himself. Saturn, the same thing. Anytime Saturn is in an angle or a trinal house for a Libra or a Taurus, it forms a Raja Yoga. Anytime Venus is in an angle or trinal house for Aquarius or Capricorn, it forms Raja Yoga by itself. Don't overlook this. And again, what tends to happen is it's easy to lose discrimination and say, oh yeah, well yeah, Saturn forms that Raja Yoga for that Libra person, but Jupiter is doing this. You know, sometimes all those things become much more secondary. Those Raja Yoga planets are very prominent, and they show a strong intelligence and accountability and integrity around that energy. and it tends to be very good at what it does. It also tends to maybe overdo it and do too much in that area, which means if you get a planet that's really, really powerful, it might tend to do too much. The planets only do what they do, and they do that well, very specifically. Each energy is very specific and separate. They're not all just mixed together. They're mixed together in us because we're not clear about what they're doing, but they're very separate forces. So when you get one that's really powerful, it tends to, like, instead of just be this simple thing that's powerful, it tends to want to go and be this big. And what it winds up doing is crowding out the other planetary energies. That Saturn that's powerful is great at Saturn stuff, but then it also tries to do Mercury stuff and Jupiter stuff and the Moon stuff. And that's when problems happen. So you always want to be careful getting too excited about any one thing astrologically. Nothing is that important. Nothing. The great planets are great, but you can't overstate it because it's just one part of life. And that'll be a very intelligent part of life. But it's not going to be intelligent if you do it too much. If you try to make everything Jupiter-like because Jupiter is powerful, then you're going to screw all that stuff up that's not Jupiter, that doesn't need Jupiter's attention. So ponder that principle. We can't wait to, like, overdo something in astrology. Astrology students can't wait to, like, latch onto something and go, oh, so this is the thing. And we do it because astrology is complicated, and we want to look for the simple answer rather than having to think so much and figure out everything. That's just a sloppy shortcut. It doesn't work. So, now Rahu and Ketu, they give predominantly the effects as do their yuti with the Bhava Lord, or as do the Bhava they occupy. It says or, but it's also both. Rahu and Ketu give the effects of the planets they're joined as a house ruler and also as planet. If they're not joined, planet, they modify the house they occupy and also, of course, the sign. So what that means is, when I say also the planet, which means Rahu is going to be joined Saturn, and it's going to magnify Saturn energy. Saturn as a Karaka, Saturn as the planet that wants to be determined to get things done and stay focused. So Rahu is going to activate that. Saturn's also the planet of our fears and stuff of that nature. But the effects that you see from Rahu influence the planet as a Bhava Lord. This is why it says predominantly the effects as do their yuti with a Bhava Lord. Bhava Lords are planets. So Rahu joins Saturn, you're going to see the effects mainly of Saturn as the Bhava Lord, which means Rahu is going to really influence 11th and 12th house things for this person, because that's what Saturn rules as a Bhava Lord. So you're going to see the nature of Saturn magnified as the Bhava Lord a lot with Rahu and Ketu, which makes sense, because Rahu especially is really about our embodied karma, our physical karma, and the physical part of the planets, what they produce is the planet as a Bhava, also as a physical Karaka, but the Bhava shows the specifics of that planet for that individual. Which means Jupiter is the Karaka of children, Venus is the Karaka of relationships. But how they play out specifically for an individual is shown by what houses they rule. And that's what Parashara is delineating. He's basically, I mean, it's actually obvious that it would be the planet as a Karaka as well. This is why I just put that in the parentheses here. Obviously, it's also going to be the planet as a natural Karaka, because that's just the nature of the planet, like fire to burn. Can't say it's going to produce fire, but it's not going to burn. Fire burns. Saturn always gives this energy, because that's his nature. But really, the effect is going to be this energy as the Bhava Lord, which he could have said as a Karaka. He could have said predominantly the effects as do their yuti with a Karaka, with the planet as a Karaka, which means Rahu Saturn would have mainly produced Saturn stuff as a Karaka, like mainly produced the stress and the health problem and the old people and the dying, or Jupiter as the teacher. But no, he says predominantly the effect is do their yuti with a Bhava Lord. So he specifically calls the planet a Bhava Lord. Again, we always have to use discrimination. That doesn't mean, oh, it's not going to produce the Karaka. It has to. The planet is the Karaka. That's its nature. So you always want to use discrimination when looking at these kind of things and acknowledge what's obvious. And if they're not joined to planet, they modify the house they occupy. And, of course, the sign, which means that the house is going to fall in a sign. So, like for instance, K2 is not joined to anything, so it's going to have a quality of Taurus, Venus, energy. The nodes exist along an axis. So we have Rahu, Scorpio, K2, Taurus here. That's the axis. So if Rahu and or Ketu are in a Kendra, receiving a drishti from or in association with the Lord of a Kona or of a Kendra, it will become a Yoga Karaka. So this is how they give Raj Yogas. Rahu or Ketu in an angle joined a trinal Lord or vice versa forms a Raj Yoga, it becomes a Yoga Karaka. So that means, like for instance, if this Rahu, if it was joined Jupiter rather than Saturn, because Saturn doesn't rule an angle or a trine, it rules these two houses, but or if it was joined Mercury. Because Mercury rules an angle, rules two angles, 4th and 7th house. If you would have had that in a trinal house joined Rahu, then Rahu would form a Raja Yoga with Mercury. Because Rahu would be in a trinal house joined an angular Lord. Like it says, Rahu Ketu in an angle joined a trine Lord or vice versa forms a Raja Yoga. So in this case, it would be the vice versa. Rahu in a trine joined an angle Lord, if it was Mercury or Jupiter here. Then it becomes a Yoga Karaka, which means then Rahu becomes a Yoga Karaka, and it's a very powerful one. Don't ever get into the idea that Rahu or Ketu can't produce great results. They can. They produce them per their nature to be confusing or whatever, but they can produce enormous insight as well. So you just want to understand a general. Rahu gives fascination with something. Ketu gives discontent. So Rahu is going to make this person fascinated with these kinds of things, 11th and 12th house things, ambition, worldly accomplishment, and letting go, gains and losses, gains and losses. Saturn is a planet of up and down, ups and downs for Pisces, and it shows this kind of wavering ambition. Sometimes Pisces are incredibly motivated in the world. Other times they're incredibly complacent and apathetic about the world. And that extreme comes from Saturn for them. One second. And because Saturn rules the 11th and 12th houses. So Rahu gives a fascination with those things. So this person would probably at times be very motivated and ambitious in the world, and as well as accomplished, because Saturn is the 11th Lord in the 9th. And Rahu is going to be excited. This person went through Rahu Dasha as well. So this could have been a time of great insight, and also retreats and 12th house stuff, which is getting away from the world. Especially in her case, because you can see that she's got a lot of dharma in her nature. She's got the 9th Lord in the 1st. She's got, aspected by the ruling planet. She's got this Rahu in the 9th gives this fascination, again, fascination with 9th house stuff. 9th house is about our philosophies and principles, like we talked about in the planet in the class on houses. So there's another thing that we haven't talked about yet that I'm going to talk about now, and that's the Atmakaraka. This is for the spiritual indicators. Planet with the highest degree in the chart is the sole indicator. So look at the Rashi and the D9 for important insight into the nature of what they follow for their spiritual upliftment and spiritual liberation. You want to, and as it says down here, in the case studies that we're going to start looking at, we want to look for Dharma, which is truth, to awaken, and Moksha, which is willingly letting go of something else for spiritual awakening. Both these things have to happen. This is why Moksha comes before Dharma. We really can't establish a new cycle of Dharma before we let go of something. Usually some Kama. This is how it works. The Kama trine comes before the Moksha trine, and then the Dharma trine comes after the Moksha trine. When you remember that Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, it's how it works. We have Dharma, which is truth, but it's also who we think we are, what we think is true. Typically, we have some sense of what we think is true, and then we get something as a result that reflects that, some kind of artha, some kind of establishment, whether it's our friends, whether it's our environment, whether it's our clothes, whether it's what we're comfortable with. Our comfort zone is really what artha is about. Then we're like, okay, now I want to enjoy this life that I've built. That's based on who I am, and I'm comfortable with that. Now I want to enjoy that, Kama. And then at some point, the things we're trying to enjoy based on who we think we are, based on our friends and all that, isn't so enjoyable anymore, and we need to let go of it, moksha. Then another cycle of dharma happens where, oh, now I've let go of that comfort zone, identity, enjoyment, pleasure, happiness cycle, and I've started a new cycle of identity, which is dharma. Now I'm going to get other friends, now I'm going to get other possessions, I'm going to eat a certain way, speak a certain way, that's all artha. That's going to be reflective of who I am, these values. Then I'm going to do stuff that I want to enjoy that, comma. Then, oh, that's not it either. I need to let go of that, moksha, let go, and incite a new level of awareness, understanding, and dharma and truth, which is who I am. So this is how these things keep building. So before any cycle of truth and awareness and dharma, there needs to be moksha. You need to let go of something to make room for a new cycle of truth. So when we're looking at this spiritual astrology, when we're going to look at these spiritual astrology examples, we're not going to, it starts with the kama that we think, okay, this is going to make me happy. We need to let go of some paradigm of kama first, which is moksha coming after kama, and then after moksha comes dharma. After I'm willing to let go of this kama in order to have this dharma. You remember I said that dharma and kama are always opposite, just like moksha and artha are opposite. Artha is where we get something. Let's say money. Let's use money because that's the way it's usually used. We get some money in artha or some value in artha. We let go of it in moksha. You never see artha and moksha together. You never see planets that rule an artha and a moksha house, ever. Just like you never see planets that rule a dharma and a kama house. Dharma and kama, it's not like they're antagonistic, but they pull at each other. We say, oh, this is who I am, now I want to enjoy that. This is who I am, dharma, now I want to enjoy it, kama. And then we're like, oh, this is not so enjoyable anymore. And so we need to let go of that kama and start a new cycle of dharma. The letting go is moksha. And what usually happens is moksha is not letting go. Moksha is where things are taken from us and it's painful and we have to learn it that way. So you need to understand this is an important distinction. Especially when we get in like the 8th house and the 12th house. 8th house especially is where things are forcibly taken from us. People die, we're lied to, we're deceived. And it's based on our naivete about the world, thinking that there's something predictable here, thinking that we can control anything, thinking that we have unlimited time. All these immature notions that we have are mainly around other people, which is 7th house. 8th house comes afterwards, and it's where things get taken. And this is usually our relationship with moksha. This is why I always really redefine moksha. When we explain it in this flowery liberation, it sounds so liberating, but it's usually not liberating. It's usually things get taken from us. It's usually loss. And usually when we lose something, it feels bad to us. But it's because we had this illusion that we ever had it to begin with. And that's not cynical, it's just real. We don't have anything here, really. We don't own anything. We need to be ready to let go of anything at any time. We usually are not very good at that. We usually get something, and we want to hold on to it as long as we can. Artha, it's mine, I got it. And when it gets taken away, we're like, oh, now what am I going to do without that thing? Now it's hard for me to enjoy life, kama. Because the thing I had, artha, got taken away. So the elegant process of how this unfolds, especially with moksha, is about letting go. Knowing when something has run its course and its time is finished and you need to let go of it now. And the willingness to travel lightly. And each time we're able to let go of something rather than weep and cry and sob because it was taken from us, we can really step into a higher level of dharma, of self-realization. And so this is what you see as we move forward in these case studies on people meeting their gurus and stuff. You'll see in the stories that we have, it's like, left my job to do this. I mean, how can we keep working our job and do something else? There's not enough, we have to make decisions at certain times. And so sometimes it's got fired from my job, and then what can seem like a forcible thing is actually an opening. It just depends on where we're at and what we're willing to, how we're willing to look at something. So we're going to integrate these concepts now We're going to be looking at Raja Yogas. We're going to be looking at the planets that show the spiritual indicators that we just talked about, especially the rulers of those Dharma houses, of those Moksha houses. We're going to look at the nature of Rahu. You know, the nodes are usually very important in getting us thinking outside of the box, and you'll see their cycles and their association with house rulers. We're also going to pay attention to the Atmakarika, that soul indicator, and we're going to just really focus on the Navamsha chart, which is really the chart of spiritual growth and spiritual development, as well as the birth chart, obviously. But as far as harmonic charts go, we can really do a lot of work by looking at the D9, and there are so many ways that astrologers now say, oh, you have to look at the D45 and you have to look at this, and we really, drill down into the most complicated micro technique imaginable. Those things work. It's not that so many things work, okay? It's such a vast architecture, but I really prefer to keep things simple and go really deep into what is simple. And until you've mastered that really simple, clear, deep approach, you really should not be stimulated or titillated by someone that says, oh no, you need to look at this harmonic chart and take this complicated formula to find this too. I mean, it sounds great and it's fine, but it's also could really be distracting you from a time much better spent going deeper into these foundational principles that we're talking about, because this is going to work regardless of what comes later. You're going to see it here. And you're going to see it with more and more depth the deeper you take it. So again, instead of go, oh yeah, Atmakarika here, got it, next thing. When you start going deeper into it, you start to see the entire story of the whole thing. Whereas if you just jump on the surface and go, okay, I got it now, what's the next thing? Let me find another way to look at it, or oh, this person said that, or I don't know, just kind of in another zone over it. You're going to risk not going as deep as you can and not really being able to flesh out the nuance. So I'm going to look at several charts here to illustrate these principles. So the first one, I just have the initials here, DR. Make this a little brighter. DR, and DR has, this is the chart that's been up here, so you're probably familiar with it now. And this person, first, here's the birth information. Summer 1998, meets Amachi for the first time after a premonitory dream about her. As a result, begins spiritual studies. Chance Bhajan studies Indian spirituality. So you see there was 1988, and then there was a big gap. 1993 begins full immersion into Indian spirituality. So she had a glimpse from the Divine Mother, Amma, 1988. So this would have been Rahu Dasha. Right away, we see Rahu is prominent. It says summer 1998. I'm sorry, summer 1988. So 1988, Rahu Jupiter, not surprised. I was going to say I would be astounded if Jupiter wasn't part of it. So yes, Rahu Jupiter. Why Jupiter? Well, when I talked about this chart in the beginning, obviously Jupiter is the person's ruling planet. Again, we're looking for Dharma, intelligence. Anytime you see the ruling planet and Atmakarika are really important for these spiritual awakenings. Also the 9th house ruler. And then, of course, things like the 12th house, which means pilgrimages and, all that kind of stuff. But for Pisces, first you want to know what the Dharma house rulers are. It's Jupiter, the Moon, and Mars, because they rule the 1st, 5th, and 9th houses. Those are the Dharma house rulers. The Sun is the Atmakarika, because you see the Sun is at the highest degree in the chart. The Sun is 2807, and the Atmakarika in the Navamsha is also in the 1st house. So the Sun, when we look at the Atmakarika, we want to look at it in the Navamsha chart as well. To just get it, this is just a kind of snapshot thing. We're not really looking at timing as much, but right away you can see Rahu Jupiter, big spiritual experience. I already talked about it's not just that Jupiter rules the 1st house. What else does Jupiter rule? Jupiter rules Mars, the 9th lord. Jupiter rules Venus, Mercury, Sun. So it rules all these things. Jupiter rules the Atmakarika. Jupiter rules the 9th lord. Jupiter is the ruling planet. Jupiter is huge for this person. Okay, but again, the dashas have to come. So Rahu, she got a glimpse in Rahu Jupiter, right? Then spring 1993 begins full immersion into Indian yoga spirituality. Is it going to be Sun or Mars? Or 2000? What is it? 1993. We're in Rahu Mercury. Okay, so why Mercury? Well, first of all, Rahu Jupiter also. Jupiter in the Navamsha chart. I forgot to mention. I'm going to be thorough. So Rahu Jupiter also activated it here. Jupiter rules all this in the Rashi chart. Jupiter rules the Navamsha. The Sun is, so Jupiter rules the Atmakaraka as well. Very important. The other thing is a principle called Vargotama. The Atmakaraka is Vargotama. You'll see this quite a bit. You'll see it in, one thing is when the Atmakaraka is in a dual sign, it's usually Vargotama because the last Navamsha of these signs is the sign itself. So the last Navamsha of Virgo is Virgo, last Navamsha of Gemini is Gemini, etc. So you see the Atmakaraka is also Vargotama. The Sun is in the same sign in both the birth chart, Rashi chart, and the Navamsha chart. So Rahu Jupiter activated all of that, so it's not surprising that she meets a saint for the first time. But then she really started her immersion in 93. Rahu Mercury. Why Mercury? Well, what does Mercury rule? And did she do a pilgrimage? Begins a full immersion to Indian spirituality, yoga, Ayurveda, Jungian psychology, Vedic numerology. Okay. So I asked about pilgrimage. It doesn't say it here because Mercury also rules Saturn, which is the 12th lord, but it activated a lot of ambition. So Mercury for this person, first of all, it rules Jupiter. Mercury rules Jupiter because Jupiter is in Virgo. Mercury also rules the 9th lord, Mars, because Mars is in Revati. Mercury also rules her ascendant because her ascendant is in Revati. So you might say, why is Mercury so? Mercury's retrograde, Rahu, Mercury. What does that have to do with spirituality? Mercury's in the 10th. Look at how many things. I said look for confluence. What does Mercury rule? It rules the ascendant, Dharma. It rules Mars, 9th house lord, Dharma. It rules her ascendant lord, Dharma. That's huge. It also rules Saturn because Saturn's in Jeshta, which is the 12th lord. Saturn's the 12th lord, which is the moksha house, letting go. Letting go of one identity and going into another. So then around the end of 2003, this is another big time. Quits PR. So as you see, after 2003, big things changed. There's a lot of stuff here with learning different kinds of yogas. But let's see what happened in 2003. What do you think is going to happen? Jupiter Dasha. Ta-da! Why is Jupiter so important? Well, if I haven't said it already, this person's Jupiter Dasha runs, and what do you think is going to happen? See, again, this is a thing. Rahu, and again, it's the nature of Rahu. Rahu is in the 9th, so this time she's experimenting early in the Rahu Dasha, which 1988 is early in Rahu Dasha. As soon as she went into Rahu Jupiter, which is the first subcycle of Rahu, which is really dharmic. You see, Rahu has joined Saturn. It's in the 9th, so it means that she's going to look for philosophy. When her Rahu Dasha started, Rahu in the 9th is about trying to find my philosophy. What do I believe in? What's my purpose? What's my belief system? But it's joined Saturn, which is the 11th and 12th lord. So what it did is it gave her, first of all, she has a lot of ambition with Rahu joined Saturn in the 11th. So she says she quit PR executive position. Doesn't surprise that she had a powerful job with all these planets there. But so the karmas woke up in Rahu, but it took 15 years before she actually really quit the job, and then her whole life changed here, which we'll read through these in a second. But Rahu Jupiter, the first sort of glimpse is like, she meets a saint. I mean, Amachi is an amazing saint. She had this premonitory dream about her. As a result, begins spiritual study. So Amma was the first introduction into, wow, this whole world. But this is Rahu. Rahu still had a lot of, I got to figure it out for myself karma to deal with. Especially because it's with Saturn, which which has a lot of pressure to figure things out or to be ambitious, especially for her as the 11th Lord. Spring 1993, she had another awakening in Rahu Mercury because of all the stuff that Mercury rules. You know, Rahu Jupiter was powerful to get her on the path, and then Rahu Mercury, because Mercury rules Jupiter, Mercury rules the 9th Lord, Mercury rules her ascendant. Mercury rules so much, so Rahu Mercury was another expedition of spiritual promise, which kind of sort of hung out for a while. And Rahu Dasha, the rest of Rahu, she was like, I'll figure it out, I'll find a way. I have my philosophy, it's like this is the way it is. Yeah, I'm spiritual, I figured these things out, I'm into Indian spirituality, numerology. Look, all of these things she tried. Rahu, immersion in spirituality, yoga, Ayurveda, Jungian psychology, Vedic numerology. This is Rahu, looking for the answer. What is it? Trying all kinds of stuff, right? And it started in Rahu Mercury, which is Mercury, trying to find a lot, trying to figure a lot of things out. But September 2003, Jupiter, bam, and that's it. She's like, I need to really dedicate myself to this, because all this gathering hasn't provided an answer. So September 2003, quits job. They begin studies of a spiritual form of classical Indian dance, Kriya, yoga initiation. This is all from 2003, early 2004, April 2005. Graduation level 3 Reiki, receives Reiki Master. December 2005, learns primordial sound meditation, takes Ayurvedic course at Chopra Center. Then April 2006 until 2011, returns to India, lives there for presumably like 5 years, April 2006. So that's a big time. Jupiter, Saturn. April 2006. But Saturn, this is like, now all of this was, I would assume, living in the U.S., not living in India here, returns to India and lives there for 5-year full immersion. Why Jupiter, Saturn? What does Saturn rule? What did we just say? Saturn rules the 12th house. Letting go. I already said earlier, moksha. It wasn't that my life has been ripped from me. I mean, maybe there's often a part of that, but that's it. I'm going to live. I mean, 12th house is about living in a foreign country. So she returned to India, lived there for 5 years, full immersion, studied Sanskrit, chooses Sam's online articles and videos, favors his teachings, and then October 2007, while in the midst of that, has Kundalini experience while meeting Dattatreya Shiva Baba. He becomes her guru. So October 2007, he becomes her guru. So this was right after Jupiter, Mercury. Again, Mercury again. So Saturn, Jupiter, Saturn, she goes to India for all that time. Saturn's the 12th Lord. Again, you can see so much in the Rashi chart. It's why you definitely can use harmonic charts, and you can see things, especially a lot of specific things when you get into these kinds of hairline predictions. Again, Jupiter, Saturn, remember I talked about look for when the Mahadasha planet rules the Subdasha planet. Jupiter, Saturn was big because Jupiter rules Saturn. You see that? Jupiter rules Saturn in the Navamsha. Saturn has joined the Atmakarika. It's joined the Sun. Jupiter is going to be such a big time, not just in a Rashi chart, but in the Navamsha as well, because Jupiter rules it. Jupiter also rules Mars, the 12th Lord. So Jupiter, Mercury was really big. In the Navamsha chart, you see Mercury's in the 12th as well. So Jupiter, Saturn rules the 2nd and 3rd, and it's with the Sun. Sun is also the 9th Lord in this chart, but it's the Atmakarika. So you can really see the far. I mean, you can see in either harmonic chart, but often I find the course of a person's life, like when they move somewhere and do this and do these big things, you find it more often in the Rashi chart. I just have to say, as much as I use harmonic charts, and you definitely can look into micro integers of change in a person's life, you often see the big things, like for instance, leave this relationship, go into this one, or big things like that. You see it in the Rashi chart, usually a little bit more. But again, sometimes you don't see it as much. You have to look at the individual. But here, it would make sense that it would be in the Rashi chart more or as much, because the Rashi chart is so geared towards spirituality with the ninth lord in the first, and all the stuff I already talked about with what Jupiter is ruling and all of that. Rahu in the ninth, all of these things. Rahu in the ninth joined the 12th lord. So you see that so clear, Jupiter, Saturn, that she would do this. It's not only that Saturn is the 12th lord, but it's also joined Rahu in the ninth, which, again, Rahu is also about foreign travel, foreign things. So Jupiter, Mercury, again, you obviously see it in the Navamsha as well. Jupiter rules Saturn. Jupiter rules Saturn, and also Saturn rules Ketu, which is, again, Ketu also has this, this kind of discrimination, like, that's it, I'm out of here. Like, I'm disgusted with the world. I'm disgusted with my life. Even if it's not that harsh, something of that quality, like to just say, Ketu only wants liberation. So again, I say Ketu because Jupiter, Saturn, in the Navamsha, Saturn rules Ketu. So again, you always have to remember, all those rules I talked about, it's not just in the Rashi chart. So when you're looking at the Navamsha chart, which is like the Soul's Course and a lot of those things, the Jupiter-Saturn Dasha, Jupiter, again, it rules the Atmakaraka, it rules Saturn, it rules Mars, which is the 5th and 12th lord, in the 4th, which is also about moving. Again, all of these specifics are here. The whole Jupiter Dasha is going to be activating all of these things. Saturn rules 2nd and 3rd house, which is my values and changing them. Jupiter also rules Mars, the 5th and 12th lord. Again, 12th house is about travel. That's just a phenomena of the whole Jupiter Dasha. It's going to feel like, spiritually, that, okay, now I'm moving, and in my heart I'm changing, and I'm, if I have to go here, I'll go here. If I have to go there, I'll go there. And there's a bit of a restlessness because the 12th lord is in the 4th, and it's being ruled by the Mahadasha planet. Mars is in Pisces, which is ruled by Jupiter. So the whole Jupiter Dasha, her spirituality is going to have that quality. And Jupiter is ruling the Sun, which is the 9th lord, which is the Atmakaraka, the soul indicator. So this person with the soul indicator being the Sun means they follow power. They're looking for that external power to kindle the internal power. That's why they're looking for a guru. They understand the need for a guru. I mean, her first connection with Indian spirituality was through a guru. That doesn't always happen. And then she found her personal Sadguru, which is Dattatreya Shiva Baba. So the Sun, as the 9th lord, is very much about wanting that guru and being a guru herself, being a teacher herself. This is why she didn't just fool around. She went and got trained and practicing and being that herself as well. And again, Jupiter Dasha is when a lot of all this started. What does she do? She goes, look at the whole thing. She quits the PR executive position to become a yoga teacher, Jupiter, teacher. Begins studies of Indian dance, Kriya initiation, Reiki training, teacher certification. She's just getting tons of knowledge so she can go teach it. It's Jupiter, total Jupiter stuff. So you want to understand this is all pervasive. Look at how many things line up in that Jupiter Dasha. So again, where we were was Jupiter Mercury, and she meets the Guru, has a Kundalini experience, October, right after Jupiter Mercury. He becomes her Guru. So she meets the Satguru then. So again, Mercury rules her Lagna, Mercury rules her 9th lord, which is Guru. Mercury rules Jupiter, which is literally named Guru. And she's in Jupiter Mercury. So again, Jupiter is ruling Mercury. Mercury and Jupiter exchange. Mercury rules Jupiter. It's like Jupiter rules Mercury, Mercury rules Jupiter. You're in Jupiter Mercury. Mercury also rules, actually, not only that, but Jupiter and Mercury both rule these things. Jupiter and Mercury both rule her ascendant. Jupiter and Mercury both rule her 9th lord, Mars. Because Jupiter rules it through sign and Mercury rules it through nakshatra. So you really see this in the Rashi chart. Again, like I said, you don't overlook the Rashi chart and just going really deep into this stuff. Especially when a person's Rashi chart is so aligned with all these yogas like this person is. You're going to see much of the power come through this person's Rashi chart. It's going to be affirmed in the Navamsha. Typically, if you'll see that the Rashi chart is really weak, but let's say the Navamsha is really powerful, then the person maybe will have a strong emphasis on this area of life, or whatever area of life where that Varga is really powerful. Then you would read that one more, probably, especially when those dashas line up that really activate that chart. Like when the Lugna Lord of that chart runs, which is what's happening here in her Jupiter dasha. Jupiter not only rules her Rashi chart, it rules her Navamsha chart. Again, so it's just Jupiter's, it's so concentrated around so many principles here. This is why you would have to be a fool not to know that as soon as Jupiter dasha starts, it's like everything is going to change. I mean, she went to so many gurus. Even after she met her guru, she visits Satya Sai Baba. She visits Amma in her ashram again in Hyderabad. Visits Sri Ravi Shankar in Hyderabad. She's just going to visit all kind of gurus. This is 2009, 2010. Probably Mercury and then Ketu. Yeah, she goes Jupiter, Ketu. And then Jupiter, Venus. So you see there's a gap. I was going to say Jupiter, Venus would be a little trickier because Venus is a difficult planet for Pisces. It rules the 3rd and the 8th house. So 2010 to so she was in Venus Dasha from November 2010 until July 2013. So look how it kind of 2010, 2013, there's a bit of a gap. Visits Amma in her ashram. So this was all time where there was a lot going on. So if we look at Ketu, we see that, again, we talked about Ketu because she went through Jupiter, Mercury, then Jupiter, Ketu. Ketu is in the 3rd house here and in this chart as well. A lot of 3rd house energy, which is a lot of traveling, a lot of I want to do this, I want to do that. The other thing is Ketu rules Venus because Venus is in Mula. So this is one of the things that Jupiter people can do. And this is why Venus can be a distracting planet for them because Venus is about, okay, now I want to enjoy this. Now I want to feel this beauty and love, which is fine. But it can distract Pisces. Getting all this training and doing all this wasn't because they wanted to meet a lot of people. It's because they were aligned with principle. Venus can tend to be distracting to a Jupiter-ruled person. So some of this was distraction. Not like, I mean, it's a good distraction. I mean, she's visiting saints. It's not like it's a, again, everything is in context. And it's also furthering her status, and she's meeting people and stuff like that. But you see how this is because Jupiter at Ketu's in the 3rd in both the Navamsha and the Rashi chart. 3rd house is about, it's about exploring our interests. It's about doing things we enjoy. It's personal kama, personal enjoyment. And it rules Venus, which is also the 3rd and the 8th house ruler, which again is also about establishing a new kind of paradigm of enjoyment. And maybe a bit distracted from the clarity of the vision. Not for a bad reason, but it can feel like that for Pisces. This is why there's a gap. Then February 18, 2013, February 2013, which is where we're coming to the end of the Jupiter Dasha, she receives spiritual name Lalita from her guru. And then July 2013, which is right when she started Jupiter's Sun. It was a little bit before, but it was essentially graduates from American Academy of Vedic Art and Science Level 1 Astrology Certification course. So she graduated from another training, which was a long 9-month training with my school in July 2013, which is right at the inception of her Jupiter Sun Dasha. So you can see even how this Jupiter-Venus, as far as, studying and all that was kind of like a time where things fell off a little bit. Enjoying life, setting up, establishing comfort, maybe, redoing a relationship or just getting clear about herself as a creature, as a social creature, and things like that. So after the otherworldly traveling, especially because Mercury and Ketu have a lot of those qualities. Venus is about, okay, now how am I going to establish this in the world? How am I going to set up? And we can see this also in her Navamsha. This is where we can take a look at that. Because again, in the Rashi chart, Venus is ruled by Ketu. Here, Venus, well, I should say, and it's in Sagittarius, so she wants to meet, so she's meeting other teachers and stuff like that, but then in Jupiter Venus, it kind of stops. Here in the Navamsha chart, you can see Venus is in her own sign, but it's in the 6th. It's in Taurus. So relative to her like spiritual travel and her experience, it's really about, okay, now re-establishing, setting up a Taurus quality of life, setting up a sort of home base and getting solid and getting, focused on how I'm going to use this in the world for good. Because again, it's in the 6th house. It's the 6th lord in the 6th in the Navamsha, right? And this is always an interesting thing that people have a hard time getting with is this relationship that planets have with each other. You see Jupiter, Venus, and it's like, oh, they're two good ones. That should be great. It can be it's a tricky dasha. It's almost always a little difficult. Venus, Jupiter, or Jupiter, Venus. It doesn't mean good things can't happen. It means that there's an inner struggle that is getting worked out. Often it's around relationship and purpose, like romance and happy with other people and staying on purpose. So these kinds of things are often a part of that dasha bhukti, regardless of how they're situated. Here, Jupiter rules Venus, so it's another one of those situations where Jupiter rules Venus, just like Jupiter rules Mercury. So that's why there are big changes, but it's less around, I should say it's more around wanting to set up a sort of worldly paradigm of how to use the teachings, because Venus rules the 11th in the Rashi chart, and how to best serve her dharma and her purpose, because Venus is the 6th lord and the 6th in the Navamsha chart. But then the Sun Dasha starts, and she got another degree, and she's, again, Jupiter rules the Sun. The Sun is the Atmakaraka. Jupiter rules the Sun in the D9 as well. So this is a very fertile and amazing cycle that's going on until next June, where she's running the dasha of the 9th lord in the Navamsha, which is ruled by the dasha planet, and it's her Atmakaraka. So this is now is also a great time of putting her dharma and her purpose into practice. And again, you want to look and see what is the Atmakaraka doing in the Rashi chart here. It's the Sun, which rules the 6th house. So this is why this person is very much about service, hard work, service to her guru, service to what she believes in. And she doesn't mind using things like her PR experience or anything that she's probably, she's bringing a lot of those kinds of executive power positions into serving her dharma, serving her purpose, serving her gurus and her teachings and her teachers. And as it should be. You see she's got all this power in the 10th house to be prominent, to step up and be recognized, to not shy from all that. So again, all of these are reasons why she's always wanted to use her power as a form of good in the form of service, the Sun as the Atmakaraka. And so now she's running Jupiter Sun, and those karmas are coming into fruition. She just got a astrology certification and she'll be taking a more prominent role now in that, and especially in her dharma as well. Now it's really a time, because anytime the Atmakaraka is in the 1st house, it's actually a symbol of fame. It's said to make the person famous when the Karakamsha is in the 1st house. Fame, at least in the sense of however they experience it, just being known for as much as they want to be known for. Now is a time for her to really do those things, and to really and to get some notoriety and recognition, and she'll be seeing herself experiencing that for herself, like on her own terms, not just for something external, but as a practitioner, as an astrologer, as a yoga teacher. It'll be a time for her to step into that and say, now I need to do this. And in fact, the Sun is a cruel planet in that it's cruel in the sense that it pushes us outside of our comfort zone. So, it's not bad. Cruel doesn't mean bad. It means it gives us the power to do those things that don't just make us happy and comfortable. And this is why Jupiter-Venus is a little difficult for the Jupiter-ruled people, because Venus is wanting to be comfortable and happy. And then this is why the Sun comes next and says, the heck with that. You need to shine and blow out that power that you have and share it. And this is what this person is going to be doing now in Jupiter-Sun. Because Sun is the Atmakaraka, it's the 9th lord in the first. Jupiter rules the Sun in the Navamsha chart. Sun is in the 10th and in the Rashi chart. It's a very powerful time. So now we have another study of a male born December 7, 1987 through 28 in Buffalo, New York. Creates this chart here and have some recent events from their life that have shown their spiritual awakening to, different teachings and to astrology and to gurus and whatnot. So let's see what we have here. First we have a Taurus ascendant, Taurus rising sign, which is ruled by Venus. So again, we know that Saturn is going to be really important. It was one of those planets, as you remember, one of these Yogacaraka planets. The planet that owns both an angle and a trine in a trinal house by itself. The planet that owns both an angle and a trinal house by itself creates a Raja Yoga. When this occurs, that planet becomes in some ways more important than the Lugna Lord. So we see Saturn for Libra and Taurus. So we have a Taurus rising sign. So Saturn himself is going to be really powerful. If he's in an angle or a trinal house, Saturn is going to be really important. And for Taurus, Saturn rules the 9th house, which is the house of finding that sense of meaning and purpose and dharma. So is Saturn important? Yes. It's in an angle. So it's the 9th lord in the 7th. It forms a powerful Raja Yoga for this person already. So Saturn is really powerful. You look at these high degrees, Saturn is also the Atmakaraka. So that's really important. So for any Taurus person, again, you want to look at Saturn and see what's going on. Any Libra person, you want to look at Saturn. Any Leo or Cancer person, you want to look at Mars. And any Capricorn or Aquarius person, you want to look at Venus. Because those are the Yoga-karakas. By themselves, they form Raja Yogas. Which means just having Saturn in the 7th house in an angle is going to be really important for this person and their spiritual development. But in this case, this person's Saturn is also joined the Sun. So it forms a Raja Yoga with the Sun. It's the 9th lord joined the 4th lord in the 7th, Raja Yoga. It's also joined Mercury. It's the 5th lord joined the 10th lord in the 7th. This person has got a great chart for teaching, for living a life in accordance with their dharma and purpose. Even though the ruling planet goes into the 8th house, which is complicated, but it also gives a life where the person loves to do research and they love to explore the hidden mysteries of life. And they also have Rahu up here with Jupiter. Jupiter's in his own sign, and Rahu is there trying to really understand the pure teachings, the highest teachings, so the person will be a little bit of what they call a heretic, in the sense that they will rebel against their own religion. This is what it's called a Guru Chandala Yoga, so you'll see the person will often rebel against their own religion. That's just the principle of Rahu Jupiter. They'll not be so religious as they'll be wanting to have their religion make sense. And they'll dabble and experiment with their own paradigm of meaning and purpose. So much of this person's spiritual path really revolves around, like it says here, after growing up in Christian faith, leaves it in 2011. Then it says, find Sam Jeppy's podcast, Venus in Cancer, chooses him as guru, teacher, and mentor. I wonder if they have to do with it. I hope they're not related. Well, like I didn't have anything with you leaving Christian faith, but it basically says leaves the practice of Christian faith in 2011. So this person's story starts in 2009, June 2009. Then he talks about studying Vedic astrology through Sam's books. So let's look at this June 2009. So again, this person's in Saturn Dasha. It's not surprising. Like I said, Saturn is not only their 9th house ruler in their 7th house. It's also joined their 5th house ruler, their 2nd house ruler, and also Saturn, the 4th house ruler. So Saturn also rules. We want to see any planet that Saturn rules as well. Does Saturn rule any planets? Or Saturn rules the nakshatras. Well, first of all, there are no planets in Saturn's sign, but Saturn rules the nakshatras of Pushya, of Anuradha, and of Uttarabhadrapada. So, Saturn also rules Mercury, which is in Anuradha, and it also rules Rahu, which is in Uttarabhadrapada. So Saturn Mercury, there was probably some time of exploration as well around these things. He was still young, though. He was 19, so this is like the time of going to college and stuff like that. So not it's still very early in life, so you always have to consider those things. But there was still, probably a deep, a sort of deep questioning in Saturn Mercury. And we haven't looked in a Navamsha chart yet, and I'll get to that in a second. I just want to look at the birth chart, the Rashi chart. But Saturn Ketu is where you started seeing a lot of changes. So, well, Ketu doesn't rule anything in this person's chart. It doesn't rule any planets. But Ketu is in Virgo, in the 5th house. So Ketu is in the 5th house, so it's going to modify, it's going to bring 5th house quality. So this is Saturn Ketu, and this person really followed a lot of their heart's desire, their creativity, their, 5th house is about learning. It's about education. Not necessarily in a university. It's about your heart's desire, learning what you love, creating something that's important to you. And so he started, certainly astrology is all over the 5th house. So his Saturn Ketu, June 2009, even if we look at the 3rd level here, Saturn Ketu Rahu, if it was June 2009, Saturn Ketu Rahu, so you see that would also be, this whole 5th and 11th house. So he found my podcast on Venus and Cancer. That's a very Rahu and a very 11th house thing, because that's just a kind of public thing that goes out to a whole bunch of people. But his Rahu in the 11th, Rahu's also joined Jupiter, which has to do with guru and teacher, mentors and things like that. But you can just see Saturn Ketu in general is going to show a very ripe time. And this is a young person, 1987, so even now the person is 26 as I record this in 2013. 25, sorry. And so as soon as any kind of dasha lined up for him to be seeking and to be making changes, he's done it. This is just a part of this person's nature. Rahu Jupiter makes that happen, where they test teachers and make sure teachings make sense, but they can also get distracted and not focus enough on being thorough and learning things thoroughly, wanting to jump ahead too quickly. But also, again, like I said at the beginning, this is very important. Everything is not equal. This person's character is going to revolve around all of this stuff. Saturn, Sun, Mercury. It's also aspected by Jupiter. There's an aspect here of especially Sun and Saturn, very close aspect. Of course, they're in the sign of Scorpio, which is about looking deeper into things. And Venus, the ruling planet, is also in Scorpio. So there's a lot of that kind of research. So it didn't take long for this person. Saturn, Mercury, they probably started looking a little bit, but they were still young. Saturn, Ketu, bam. Ketu's in the 5th house. Saturn is this Raj Yoga. Let's look into Navamsha chart, because we'll obviously see some important stuff in the Navamsha chart as well. First of all, Saturn is the ruler in the Navamsha chart. It rules the Navamsha chart. Very, very important. Saturn not only rules the Navamsha chart, Saturn rules the Sun, which is the 8th lord rather, and Saturn rules Jupiter, Mars, and Ketu. Remember this principle: whenever the Dasha Lord rules the sub-Dasha planet, big things happen. And in this case, things related to Ketu, which are focusing on something. Like, Ketu is really about, in the highest sense, it's about metaphysical knowledge. And literally, it's about metaphysical knowledge and wisdom that we have. Rahu is where we're trying to gather more of it, and we can kind of just get in this gathering mode. But Ketu is actually where you see the kind of innate wisdom that the person has. When Ketu's in the 5th house, the person is innately intelligent. It's a sign of intelligence. And Rahu in the 11th then shows that they're looking to universalize that and take what is naturally, where they're naturally creative, and share it with a lot of people. And also be ambitious to bring it out in a public way. But literally, the 5th house is about, it's about wisdom and our heart's desire and intelligence. And so Ketu in the 5th, in this natal chart, shows this love of learning, especially like metaphysical things. Very clear. I mean, it's really clear. Ketu in the 5th shows that not just a love of knowledge. Like, for instance, I have moon in the 5th. So the moon is like, the mind is creative. Ketu is like that kind of soul, that sort of soul wisdom, that soul creativity. So this person at a very young age has woken up to all of this, this intense spiritual wisdom. Mainly because his Raja Yoga, Mahadasha Lord, is running. That dasha is running. So you could have this kind of stuff, this kind of potential, but it won't manifest because the dashas don't run. He's getting the dashas. The dasha of Saturn now is in full swing. It's his 9th Lord, 9th and 10th Lord, that Raja Yoga planet in the 7th, with the 4th Lord, with Mercury. And again, with the 4th Lord means it really anchors his heart, really anchors him. He's very emotionally anchored in that consistent, powerful teaching. And he wants to do something with it. Saturn is the 10th Lord, career. And he's interested in exploring and communicating about it, being creative with it. This person is also into art, and they're artists, and they like to do all kinds of artistic design projects and stuff. Again, Ketu in the 5th, they understand that. They understand and they really enjoy being creative. But you just can't separate it from the fact that his dasha planet is joined these other planets and forming these powerful yogas with them. So Saturn, Ketu, that stuff woke up. Ketu in the Navamsha has also joined Mars and Jupiter, and it's, Mars is the 4th and 11th Lord. Jupiter is the 3rd and 12th Lord. So it's it's one of those things where there's a lot of initiating. There's a lot of initiation starting then, but it didn't deliver as many results yet, because in the Navamsha especially, these house rulers are not necessarily so powerful, and it's a little hung up there in the 2nd house. But then he goes into Saturn, Venus. Let's look and see here. So he starts studying. This is basically, he starts studying astrology. 2011 leaves practice of Christian faith. So it just says 2011, but he was in Saturn, Venus then. So why would Venus make him leave Christian faith? Okay, so Venus is his 1st and 6th house ruler in the Rashi chart, and it's in the 8th house. So again, this person, just in general, they have this Rahu Jupiter. So we have to see what does Venus rule besides being the ruling planet and the 6th house ruler in the 8th house. Venus is also in its own nakshatra. Again, and this is not to be taken lightly, Venus rules herself, you would say. So it's very strong 8th house, 1st Lord in the 8th kind of change. But the other thing that's also quite meaningful is in the Navamsha chart, Venus is in the 9th house. So it's going to show a deepening of faith or a recalibration of faith. Again, we say that leaves the practice of the Christian faith, leaves it. Remember, we're talking about moksha, breaking. You'll see, just like the other person, when they went into that time when the 12th Lord was activated, with Saturn, Jupiter, Saturn, they went to India. They left their life. Here, Venus goes to the 8th. It's actually the 6th Lord in the 8th, 1st Lord in the 8th. And so there's a break, a moksha. I'm leaving it. But it's also to deepen their authentic beliefs. It's because there are a new set of beliefs that are coming about. Now, this Venus is also aspected by Saturn in the D9. So Venus isn't ruling anything here. It's also aspected by Saturn in the Navamsha chart. And the other thing that's also really important is Venus rules Mars. Can't forget that. Again, of course, what the planets rule. What does Mars have to do with leaving a religion or activating anything? Well, Venus rules Mars, so Mars has been active in this. First of all, Mars is the 12th lord, which is very important. And Mars is also the ruler of Scorpio. So the 7th and 12th houses have been very activated. So this would also be a time of, like major relationship kind of stuff. Big relationship time for this person as well. And I would bet a lot of those changes came around through partners. And it's just their assessment of themselves in relation to other people and realizing that, the Christian faith as it was shown to them is not what they're going to, believe in. That's not their belief system, which doesn't mean that the person doesn't still have a favorite deity of like Jesus or whatever, because they even list Jesus as a deity that they relate to, or as an incarnation, an avatar, really. But Christianity, quote, is being let go of. Mars is the 12th lord. Mars is in Venus's sign. So Saturn, Venus activates Mars in the 6th. Mars is the 12th lord, and also all these planets in the 7th. So other things, that like have to do also with relationships and romance and stuff would be important during that time, because Venus is the Karaka and it rules the 7th lord. So again, I said before, look for confluence. Venus is the Karaka of relationships, and it rules the 7th lord in the Rashi chart. In the Navamsha chart, which is also a chart of relationships, Venus doesn't rule. It doesn't rule anything, but it goes to the 9th, and Venus is a Raja Yoga here. Again, we can't forget, these same rules apply. Anytime a trinal lord or angle lord goes into angle or a trine, or anytime an angle lord goes to a trine or trine lord goes to an angle, or Venus for Capricorn is that Raja Yoga planet, and it goes to the 9th. So it's actually the 10th lord in the 9th, in the Navamsha. So it forms a Raja Yoga, and it really is around a sense of duty, purpose, contribution. These are the things that created the shift. This person wanted to contribute in harmony with their innate nature. Venus is the 5th lord, and it's also the 10th lord in the Navamsha, and so they want to be able to contribute in accordance with their creative identity, their creative reality. And so in order to do that, and in order to feel congruent around that, they have to leave that practice of the Christian faith. So this starts a lot of stuff here. It's 2011, he says, but before that, we have, October 2011, begins Kundalini Yoga, starts spiritual buzzsaw in the U.S., I'm not sure what that is. April starts yoga certification program, begins level 1 Vedic astrology program, receives Hatha yoga training. Look at all this stuff that happened between these periods. This is all Saturn-Venus. You really see an acceleration of his dharma, of his purpose, of his identity, of what he wants to do in Saturn-Venus, which is from January 2010. Then he goes into Saturn's Sun in March 2013. So then we have May 2000, receives training and certification of level 1 Reiki practitioner, and then graduates from level 1 astrology course. So since his Saturn Sun Dasha, you start seeing a, even more, he gets more training and then graduates from astrology certification. So again, Saturn's Sun, Saturn has not only joined the Sun, but Saturn, importantly, rules the Sun in the Navamsha. So this is a very important time for this person to really establish those things on a foundational level in their heart. And really, the fourth house and fourth house ruler, it's a moksha house, and it's very much about feeling solid in our core with what we're doing. And of course, all these Raja Yogas with the fourth lord. Saturn is the ninth lord, join the fourth lord and the seventh. Again, this is also has to do with things like partners, maybe moving in with partners or getting more solid with partners. And also Mercury, Sun. The Sun has also joined Mercury, the fifth lord. But again, it's Saturn, Sun, so it implicates all of this. Saturn is also the ruler of Mercury because it's an Anuradha. It's the ruler of Rahu. So these are all just qualities of Saturn Dasha, but Saturn, Sun, especially because Saturn rules the Sun in the Navamsha chart. The truth is, Saturn also rules the Sun in the Dasamsha chart. So this has been a time since March where his career has also really flourished, at least in regard to what he wants to communicate. His being a teacher and a guide through language and through words, and having his career be congruent with his principles, and have his dharma and his purpose be congruent around his principles, has been really big. I mean, this is really, again, you see so many things come together. Saturn is the Atmakaraka, Saturn is the Dasha Lord, Saturn rules the D9, Saturn rules the D10. So he's going to actually have this whole cycle of Saturn as the Atmakaraka, as the ruler of these important harmonic charts, just driving power through his life. You can see why Saturn's Sun has been an upgrade even from just getting trained. Now he's putting it out there. So from now until February of next year, at least, Saturn's Sun will be a great time for him to, this is as I record this in September of 2013. This Saturn-Sun cycle is a time when not just his sense of purpose and his sense of duty is congruent in his heart and in his life, but also his career is showing it because Saturn rules the Sun. Now it's shown some changes. He's had to let go of some duties and responsibilities because Sun is the 8th lord in the 2nd and all that. But Saturn forms a Raja Yoga in the D10 because it's the 1st lord in the 4th. Again, so really following his heart and trusting his gut is going to really take him far. But you can see this spiritual awakening. And I think Saturn Sun is also going to be this is also going to be a time for him to really transform and find also look for maybe change spiritual teachers or go deeper into certain kind of spiritual teachings. Maybe not change, but really be very transformed by his work and his teachings, because the Sun rules the 8th and it also rules Rahu. And so, especially like this Reiki or the yoga, or maybe meet important guru between now and next year. I wouldn't be surprised between between March 2013 and February 2014 could definitely be a time to meet important guru and spiritual teacher as well. We have this chart of female NM, and you see that this chart here, we have some good dates to pursue as well, just the years at least, but we can make some important distinctions here. It says 1997, Kriya Yoga initiation, begins Vedic astrology studies, lives in Yoga Center. This is Pranayama meditation of Yogananda, Kriya Yoga. So in 1997, you see this was in a Rahu Saturn Dasha. This person was in Rahu Dasha. And you see we have a Cancer ascendant, Jupiter in the 1st, very strong exalted Jupiter, the 9th house ruler, in the 1st. So this right away is going to make this person very philosophical and seek higher meaning and purpose. Not only is Jupiter in the 1st, but it's exalted there. And this is a truly exalted Jupiter, 2 degrees of Cancer.
And the nakshatra is in Pushya here, which is, I'm sorry, the nakshatra of the ascendant is Pushya, which is ruled by Saturn. So this is one reason why we see a strong Saturn influence here. She has Mars, Ketu in the fourth house. And again, remember these rules of Raja Yoga. Rahu is the fifth lord in the fourth. Anytime we have a Cancer person and Mars is in either an angle or a trine, it forms a Raja Yoga. Not only that, Ketu forms a Raja Yoga with Mars as well, because based on these rules, with the nodes, Rahu and Ketu give predominantly their effects due to their yuti with the Baba Lord, which means Ketu's in the fourth, join the fifth lord. And then if Rahu and Ketu are in a Kendra, receiving a drishti from or in association with the Lord of Akona, or vice versa, it'll be a Yogakaraka. So Ketu is in a Kona with a, or I'm sorry, it's in a Kendra with the Lord of Akona. Kendra means angle, Kona means trikona, which is a trine. So it's in an angle with the trine lord. So Ketu also forms Raja Yoga. So Rahu Ketu, it's going to be very strong. Both of the nodes are forming Raja Yogas. Rahu is also in the 10th with the first lord, which is in an angle with the trine lord. Ketu is in an angle with the trine lord. Mars and Moon also aspect each other. Mars and Moon form Raja Yoga. Ketu forms Raja Yoga with Mars. Mars forms a Raja Yoga. Moon forms a Raja Yoga, being the first lord in the 10th. Rahu forms Raja Yoga with the Moon, being in an angle with the trine lord. There's just Raja Yogas everywhere here along this 4th and 10th house axis. Jupiter forms a Raja Yoga as the 9th lord in the first, trine lord in an angle. We also have Saturn forms a Raja Yoga as an angle lord and a trine, 7th lord in the 9th. So again, a lot of Raja Yogas in this chart. So again, and they're all of the trine lords are forming Raja Yogas. The Moon rules the trine, which is the first house, and again, trine is the Dharma houses. The trinal house rulers are the Dharma houses, the planets of intelligence. Like I said, one of the things we want to look for spiritual awareness is actually wisdom and intelligence. Look for Dharma and Moksha, so truth, awakening, and the willingness to let go of something for spiritual awakening. So this is what we have with this chart. We have the ruler of the 1st and the 10th with Rahu forms Raja Yoga. Jupiter, which is also the ruler of the 6th, but it's the 9th lord in the 1st. 9th house is Dharma, 5th house is Dharma, and 1st house is Dharma. And we also have Mars, the 5th lord, in the 4th. 5th lord, 9th lord, 1st lord, all forming Raja Yogas. And the 9th house is also full of Raja Yogas, with the 7th lord there and the sun, which is also the Atmakaraka. The sun is the Atmakaraka. So realize all of the charts that we've been looking at are people who have a natural tendency towards spirituality, and you're seeing all of these things reinforced so many times. Most charts do not have this much pointing towards spirituality. I mean, authentic spirituality, like to leave their culture and go to India and get gurus and all of this stuff. Most people don't have that strong tendency. You're seeing it in these charts because these people have a lot of strong tendencies. These are my astrology students and people who are, you know, who volunteered a lot of their information. But you see this very intimately in this person's chart. Just their nature is going to be that way. But of course they went through Rahu Dasha. They started Rahu in 1990, so it took a while. 1997 is when this started. When their spirituality started. It took like 7 years for that to start. 1997, you see, is when they started that Kriya Yoga initiation. And then 98, 2000, so she meets her guru Amma in Italy and begins to and begins yearly meetings with her. So she starts seeing her guru Amma in Italy. Well, she met her in 98, so it doesn't say. It would have been better if it said the month. It's either Rahu Saturn or Rahu Mercury. Probably Rahu Saturn is probably earlier. Saturn. So let's see why Rahu Saturn. So first of all, we have to see that Rahu is because Rahu forms this Raja Yoga with the first lord. Like we said, there's a lot of Dharma here. Rahu forms Raja Yoga with the first house ruler, which is also, the moon. And Rahu also, it rules Ketu's nakshatra, Swati, because Ketu is in Swati, and that's ruled by Rahu in the Mahadasha scheme. So Rahu in general can be at a time of spiritual growth for this person because of its forming a Raja Yoga with the moon. And again, as it says, it gives per its nature with the planet as a house ruler. So it's giving per its nature as join the first house ruler, which is to develop our own identity, truthful identity. Then, why Rahu Saturn? What does Saturn rule? Well, or what is Saturn doing? First of all, Saturn is the 7th house ruler in the 9th house. So Saturn is in the 9th house, and it's also, it rules Mercury, the 12th house ruler, and the 3rd house ruler. So it's a planet of change, of courage, of inspiration, because it's in the 9th house and it's ruling Mercury, which is the 3rd house ruler. 3rd house is about courage and change, and also the 12th lord, which is about, as I say, letting go of things. Remember, I said there's usually a combination of moksha and dharma together. You're looking at dharma and moksha. Moksha and then dharma. So you got to let go of something and then grow something new. And again, look at the foreign influences as well. Mercury rules the 12th house. Rahu also has to do with foreign influences. Saturn also rules the 8th house. Saturn is the 7th lord and the 8th lord. So her spiritual philosophies and principles, which are 9th house, have an 8th house quality to them, which is the quality of letting go, sudden, shocking events, like meeting Amma, meeting Guru Amma. You see it was in Rahu Saturn, but also Rahu Mercury. Mercury is also really powerful. This is what kept it going for several years as well, and then she goes into Rahu Ketu, which we already said forms a Raja Yoga. Then Rahu Venus. Venus is the ruler of Venus herself. Venus also rules this because Venus rules Libra. Venus also rules Rahu and the moon because they're in Bharani Nakshatra. So you see a lot of these dashas, one after the next, kept reaffirming the spiritual growth. Rahu Sun is the Atmakaraka. Remember? It's the soul indicator. Rahu Moon is the Lagna Lord. Moon is going to also produce this exalted Jupiter. Rahu Mars is forming the Raja Yoga here. And then she goes into Jupiter. So you see, this is what happens when you get a chart that's so concentrated around all of these spiritual qualities. It just takes that moment of initiation. It takes a while for Rahu, Rahu Dasha, then Rahu Jupiter. You wonder why it didn't start in Rahu Jupiter. Probably the inkling started in Rahu Jupiter. She started looking for a greater philosophy. But again, one thing to realize, we always try to succeed in the world first. This is why we need moksha and dharma. We try to succeed in the world and say, okay, like I said at the beginning of this section here on the spiritual timelines and how these karmas unfold, is we start by saying, this is me, and these are my values. Now I want to go out and enjoy some of that and have some friends and have some interests that reflect who I am. And then we say, but is this really me? And then we start to let go of it, and then we do it again. When you see that this is really the person, when you see this is a very high standard of growth and development and consciousness and awareness. That doesn't mean we're not going to start by just trying to be happy in the world. Say, okay, this is me, and now I just want to be happy. But this is a very high standard. Jupiter in the first says, yeah, but there's something much bigger than all this worldly happiness, this sense of meaning and purpose. The first lord, Moon with Rahu, is stressful too. It's not just, these things that make for spirituality, it doesn't mean it makes them happy all the time. They're different things. Happiness and spiritual growth is not the same thing. Rahu Moon is also difficult psychologically and emotionally because it's like the mental perception is sped up, accelerated very quickly, so the person tends to feel things very deeply, but they don't necessarily feel so grounded in them. So there's a need to get grounded and to get connected to something. What we get connected to, though, is shown by these other things. Some people, Rahu Moon, they get connected to things like drugs and alcohol. This person might have gone through some of that, for sure. Trying to get connected to something that feels as expansive and as big as all these placements, but instead, eventually, they realize, okay, these environments are not reflecting who I really am. So they start to get into things like yoga. Many people, take a yoga class, but they don't become initiates in Kriya Yoga and then begin studying Vedic astrology and living in a yoga center, then hanging out with the guru, then traveling all over the place. This doesn't happen with everybody who tries yoga because they don't have all of these tendencies. This great Jupiter and these great dharmic indicators show that once the person finds a good teaching, they'll recognize it as that. There's a lot of counterfeit versions of teachings, a lot of counterfeit versions, which is what people often settle for. They settle for some counterfeit version that plays into their preconceptions, that plays into their projections. This is why they say the guru shows up when we're ready. And the guru is always showing up based on what we're ready for. Someone finding a guru like Amma and then staying with her shows that the person has an old soul. Because Amma's not an easy guru. None of these authentic gurus are easy to be around. Because they wake us up. We find gurus all the time to worship. We're all worshiping some teaching. And those teachings are an outer reflection of our inner mind. Some people are following, the cult of politics or of social activism or whatever it is. The cult of the National Football League or of some sport or something. It's like a cult. As much as people say, religions are cults, everything is a cult. It's just short for culture. So the culture of sports, the culture of money, the culture of success, of fame, of whatever. No, not to get too abstract, but when you see these kinds of, what this means is when you see all these dharmic principles, authentic, like exalted Jupiter in the first, which rules the ninth house, the moon, which is the Dharma Lord with Rahu, Mars forming a Raja Yoga here, all these planets in the ninth house, including the Atmakaraka, then you know this person has a high standard, and they recognize a good teaching from a counterfeit one. So once this wakes up here, once it woke up in Rahu Saturn, I'm sure it started in Rahu Jupiter, there were real rumblings of discontent. And this is probably this is Kriya Yoga initiation. But I would bet that before that, there were a deep exploration started. So you can see why all through Rahu Dasha, there's just more and more of that. All of these cycles are set up to continue the spiritual growth. And then you see what happens when she goes into Jupiter. Let's see, 2008. So what happens then? Okay, so receives spiritual name 2007, which is called Raksha, which means protection, salvation. And then 2009, first Indian tour as Amma's staff. 2013, she buys a room in Amma's ashram in Amrtapuri. 2013, July 2013, she graduates from a VAS Level 1 astrology course. So you can see, let's see these highlights. 2009, first India tour as staff. So she went into Jupiter Dasha. So this really, if we look at what Jupiter rules, it rules all of these planets here. But Jupiter is also, it's exalted in the first, and yes, it's the ninth house ruler, but it's also the sixth house ruler, which is about service. So Jupiter is also the sixth house ruler, which is the house of service. And I might have not mentioned this, but Rahu, Saturn, one of the main reasons Saturn also was the starting point is because Saturn rules her ascendant. Her ascendant is Pushya, if I didn't mention that. Yes, it forms Raja Yogas. Here, it's the 8th Lord, it's in the 9th. But it also rules her ascendant. It rules Ketu. Or no, I'm sorry, Rahu rules Ketu. But it rules her ascendant. And I also didn't mention, because I have to be looking in these Navamsha charts too, Saturn is exalted in the Navamsha chart. So Rahu, Saturn is exalted with Raja Yoga. It also forms a Raja Yoga with Mars in the first. But especially Saturn is not only exalted in the Navamsha, it's exchanging with Venus, the ruler. It's very powerful. So Saturn is a really powerful planet for this person's spiritual development. So you can see why Rahu Saturn really brought that about. Because Saturn is not only exalted in the Navamsha, in the first house, but it also rules the Lord of the Navamsha. It's exchanging with the Lord of the Navamsha. What I mean is Saturn rules Venus, and Venus is the Lord of this chart. So the Saturn cycle is going to activate the ruler of this chart, which is again going to activate her spirituality, her spiritual development. So this is one reason why Rahu Saturn started that whole thing as well. Saturn rules her ascendant. Saturn's in the ascendant in the D9. Saturn rules the ascendant ruler in the D9. Saturn is in the 9th house. It's the 7th lord in the 9th. And it's also the ruler through nakshatra of Mercury and Saturn as well. Saturn's in its own nakshatra as well. There's a lot of things lining up, as you can see. Mercury's also the 12th lord. Saturn's also the 8th lord. So that transformational yogic experience started Rahu Saturn and kept going through all of these different cycles. Then Jupiter starts. Jupiter is not only the 9th lord, so all these planets get ruled and activated, but Jupiter is also the 6th house ruler, which has to do with service. So what does she do? First Indian tour as Amma's staff. 6th house is very much about service. So she became, so she went on India tour as a Saivite doing seva for her guru. And of course, this is a foreign tour. It was in India. So there should be a foreign quality to it. Well, Jupiter's the 9th lord, which has to do with foreign trips, but you usually see a 12th house quality as well, and Jupiter rules the 12th lord, Mercury. Mercury is there. So Jupiter rules the 12th lord. Many times you also see a 4th house component, which I don't really see here, just because it uproots the it uproots the home. But don't see that here. But so Jupiter is also very important in this person's spirituality. Here's another 6th house component. Jupiter also rules the 6th house in the Navamsha. Very interesting. So Jupiter rules the 6th house for Cancer and Libra ascendant. We have a Cancer ascendant in the Rashi chart. Jupiter rules the 6th. We have a Libra ascendant in the Navamsha. Jupiter rules the 6th. Not only does Jupiter rule the 6th, Jupiter rules the Atmakarika in the 6th. This is one reason why this person's spirituality revolves around revolves around service a lot. And again, it's another example of the Atmakarika being in the last degrees of a dual sign. You see that? Because the last Navamsha of a dual sign is the same sign. Last Navamsha of Gemini is Gemini. Last Navamsha of Virgo is Virgo. Last Navamsha of Sag is Sag. Last Navamsha of Pisces is Pisces. So often when the Atmakarika is in a dual sign, it's usually also Vargotama, like it is here, which is in the same Rashi and Navamsha. So as you see, Sun is in the 6th house. So this person's approach to her spirituality is through seva. And that really kicked in during when the Jupiter Dasha started. Because Jupiter is the 6th lord, and Jupiter rules the 6th lord in the Navamsha. Makes perfect sense, right? Then she goes into Jupiter Saturn. What is this? So buys room in ashram May 2013. That's like right with Jupiter Saturn to Jupiter Mercury. So again, Mercury is the 12th lord, and again you see the 12th is it's often about losing money, but it's an expense. And the 6th and 12th houses are, the 6th house is about paying a debt, you would say, but it's often where we spend money on things we love. And the 12th house is where our resources go, or where money goes away as well. But again, it's a foreign country, Jupiter Mercury. This is the clearest indicator here. Is this Jupiter Mercury is the 12th lord. You know, in between Jupiter, we have Jupiter Saturn. So I'm sure that from 2008 through 2010 up to May 2013 was probably a very, very transformative, wonderful time. I wouldn't be surprised if she also traveled quite a bit then, or spent time in the ashram, or really deepened her spiritual practice and spiritual certainty around that time, especially from the end of 2010 until this like May 2013. Probably did a lot of studying and a lot of time, in solitude and work and meditation. Saturn is really powerful for this person's spiritual life. It's not only in the ninth, but it's the 7th lord in the ninth, which is a Raja Yoga, and in the Navamsha especially. It's exalted in the Navamsha Lagna. It's forming a Raja Yoga with the 7th lord. Saturn could be a little difficult in relationships for sure, and it can show where the person's spiritual tendencies could separate her from relationships because it's joined the 7th lord, and there could be some struggle between the relationship and the spiritual life, especially because it's also exchanging with Venus, which is the Karaka. Remember, I said to look for confluence of indicators. Saturn's in Libra, which tends to want to have simplified relationships, or can be alone. And if we're going to have a relationship, it needs to be the right one. That's why Saturn is it's good to have a Saturn influence on relationships, because it's not needy. Usually when a person has a powerful Saturn, they can be alone, and they have reasonable expectations in relationships. When Saturn is weak, often the person's boundaries are not good, and they will tend to want to cling to partners and be afraid that partners will leave, and so they'll get in weird kind of situations. But when Saturn is healthy, they'll be very vigilant about whether or not a relationship is wasting their time and all that. So it can be difficult at times for sure. So she goes through Jupiter, Jupiter, and she starts service. Then Jupiter Saturn could have had influence on relationships, and maybe leaving them or having them be up for grabs, because Saturn is also exchanging with the Karaka Venus. So then we see Jupiter Mercury buys room in Amritapuri ashram. So that's an investment in her guru's ashram. Mercury, Mercury does rule, yeah, I would think, okay, you see, this makes perfect sense. Mercury rules the sun, because the sun is in Revati. Of course, it's in the 9th house. Mercury is the 12th lord, but the sun is also the 2nd lord, which is about money. 2nd house is value, taking some of her money and spending it on a place to live in her guru's ashram. Why is the sun so important? The sun is not just money, it's her Atmakarika. This is very specific. Jupiter, Mercury. Mercury rules what? It rules the sun. The sun is in Revati. And what did she do? She spent her money, which is the 2nd house, on an ashram, which is the 12th house. Mercury stuff. Sun is also in the 9th house. So again, when you start looking for confluence, foreign countries have to do with 12th house and 9th house, mainly when you talk about ashrams. And spending time with your guru in an ashram, you'll often see a 9th and usually a 12th house component as well, one or the other, but usually both that I've seen. Because 9th lord, it's just about studying with teachers, and 12th house is just about foreign countries. Often when you see a person go to a foreign country to be with a guru, you'll see a combination. And many times people have a mixed, like she does. She has them mixed because she's got the 12th lord in the 9th. So right there, 12th lord is in the 9th. So there's going to be foreign trips to ashrams usually when Mercury gets activated. Mercury's activated in Jupiter time. Mercury's activated in Saturn time. And of course in its own time as well, in its own dasha. So, but Mercury not only activates 9th and 12th house stuff, but it activates the sun, which is the Atmakarika, soul indicator, and it shows where she takes her resources, her power, her values, and says, I'm going to move these resources and take what I value the most is living with my guru in their ashram. Huge thing. And it's not a small, it's not a small commitment. I mean, the money is definitely worth it when you look at real estate prices, but it's not an easy process. There's quite of an involved process with this, I happen to know. So it didn't just happen overnight. It started in Jupiter-Saturn. You would have to plan for that. So that's why I said Jupiter-Saturn, that plan was probably worked on a lot. And again, look at Saturn. When we look in the Navamsha chart, Saturn is with the second house lord. Saturn's with the second lord. Now she's got debilitated moon, but it's aspected by Jupiter. So she's got a benefic in the second, and it's aspected by Jupiter, even though it's debilitated. That's another thing. But again, Saturn has joined the second lord in the Navamsha. You see that? And Saturn rules Venus, and Saturn rules Ketu, which we already said. And this is also a Raja Yoga, because Ketu is in a trine with an angle lord. Just Raja Yogas all over this chart. So Jupiter-Saturn, she was living her life, and this is when she was deciding to buy the flat in the ashram, probably. Making this big commitment. And again, part of the commitment was probably like, do I want to buy a house and live with my partner in the world? Because you buy an ashram, you buy a flat in the ashram, and it's not like you live there forever, but it's like, it is a kind of, that's often the situation that we grapple with a little bit. These were probably big situations that were grappled with this person. And then July 2013, which continues, in Jupiter-Mercury, she graduated from her astrology certification. So we would see that again, ninth house, Jupiter's in the ninth, Jupiter rules the sun in the ninth. And again, it's an expression of her values. Again, here we see the value, earlier we said the values was taking her money and spending it on a flat in an ashram, but it's also our expression of her values. She worked hard for this. This was a hard course. She sacrificed, she put a lot of time and effort into it. Again, Jupiter-Saturn time. And then the payoff comes Jupiter-Mercury. Mercury's in the ninth. Mercury rules the sun, her Atmakarika. And Mercury's also the third lord, which shows initiatory instructions, Upadesha instructions, which means like the initial studies. But, her third lord goes to the ninth, which shows, again, it's moving in its opposite house, so it shows a kind of unification of initiatory instructions with graduation. Graduation is ninth house stuff. And again, she's in Jupiter-Mercury. So in this case, this is a big cycle again. One of the principles I mentioned, pay attention to when the Dasha Lord rules the Bhukti Lord. Bhukti is the secondary Dasha Lord. Jupiter rules Mercury. This is going to be a big time for this person because the Dasha Lord is ruling the Subdasha planet. Jupiter rules Mercury. So as soon as it happened, she buys a flat in Amma's ashram. She graduates from her astrology certification course. She's probably going to really start, this is a big time for her to really start putting a lot of things into practice. A lot of her teachings and things like that. And her dashas after this look also really powerful. Ketu, we already said, Venus, Moon, Mars, this is a really strong cycle that she's going into. Her Jupiter dasha is going to be amazing. It's exalted in the first. It's fantastic. In the Navamsha chart, it's in the 10th. And it rules her Atmakarika, sun in the 6th. So it shows that she works hard, and she might have in order to manifest and to bring her spirituality into the world, she sees herself as being of service. Sometimes she might have a little bit of a hard time with seeing herself as a leader, and this is what she's going to have to step into more in that Jupiter dasha because she's actually a great leader. One of the reasons why she has a little hard time with that is this Rahu moon in the 10th. Moon in the 10th wants to be comfortable. The moon wants to be comfortable. In the 10th is a lot of pressure. So this person has this kind of back and forth approach with pressure, which is a different thing. It's a different subject. We're just now looking at spirituality, but this is how you see this person's evolving spirituality and the challenges they might face as they are now being called to maybe to really step into it more. And she's feeling the pressure in Jupiter-Mercury because Mercury's ruling that sun in the 9th. Second Lord in the 9th, which is saying, bring your teaching, bring your values into the world in the form of your teachings now, and act in accordance with what you know is right, not what makes you comfortable.